Thanks for being here today. As we start off, I want to let you know Pastor Kelvin sends his regards. When he booked this breakfast, he knew he was preaching the California camp meeting, but he went to book the flights after that, and it was about a $500 difference between leaving out early this morning or leaving out a little bit later. And so he wanted to be here, but he has a preaching engagement that he's going to go ahead and take care of. So he wanted me to send you his regards, and we miss him today. And he's probably eating biscuits and gravy in the sky right now. Also, not like that means. I mean in an airplane, not in the big sky. Don't record that. Anyways, I want to say a special thank you to Shabu Joseph and Brian Wetherell and Charlie Lewis for cooking breakfast. In fact, I think they're probably upstairs. So, yeah, thank you guys. Also today, here's kind of the format for what's going to happen. Nathan Abdullah is going to lead us in a couple of worship songs, just kind of help us be led in worship. And then, immediately following Nathan, Dick Hagar is going to share with us. Now, Westmore is a great church, and there's a lot of people that grew up in Westmore, and there's a lot of people that are transplants to Westmore. And Dick is a transplant, and I got an opportunity to hear some of his story last week, and I think it's really going to touch your heart. A lot of great, incredible kind of stuff. He spent several years with NASA and worked on some rockets and did some really cool stuff, and he's got some things to show us. But let's make Dick feel welcome today and tell him how much we appreciate him. All right, if you'd stand with me, we're going to have a word of prayer, and then we'll let Nathan lead us. Father, thank you for all that you're doing. We thank you for your Holy Spirit that comforts and guides us. And we pray today, Lord, that you would strengthen us and that you would use the stories and the songs today to help our faith to grow. In Christ Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Amen. Thank you.
Blessed be the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. Blessed be the Lord God Almighty, who reigns forever. Blessed be the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. Blessed be the Lord God Almighty, who reigns forever.
I guess in a nutshell, this is the reason why I'm at Westmore, is to worship the Lord. And I think that's what we do here. I really appreciate that. It's a personal touch, everybody in his own way. So, and it's just like Kelvin, isn't it? To get me to commit, and then he bailed out. That's a man over here to help me out, though. So I do appreciate that. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the Apollo program today, but first, Kelvin wanted me to kind of walk you through how I got here. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about my beginnings. where I was born and take you right on up quickly so that it won't take a whole lot of time. Also, I had a couple, as a kid, I had a couple jobs that I wanted to talk about to kind of set my values, my work ethic. It's a shame kids don't have that today, you know, the advantages that we had. We're so blessed to really grow up in the time that we did. I will discuss then the events that I experienced with the Apollo program. I think that there were events that were unique to me. Some of them could have been life-threatening. Some of them weren't. Some of them were just maybe satisfied my ego. I don't know. We'll go through that and talk about it and let you guys decide. I got some things I'll pass around here to let you look at when we get into it, and then go from there. I was born in a small town in Ohio, Delaware, Ohio, pretty much like Cleveland. I don't know how many of you know the Buckeye State, but you know, it was just a great place to grow up. You could walk all over town at any time, day or night, and you know, you just didn't have any, I don't remember any crime. I always remember the city cops sitting about half a block down the street in a cruiser sleeping. You know, that's what I grew up to remember. I was number 4 out of 6 children. I was born at home, and I was literally born about 200 yards from the Lutheran Church. So when it come time to get the kids baptized, why, we went to the closest church, and that was the Lutheran Church. So, and of course, Dad and Mom being German, why, that kind of fit their area pretty well. So I was baptized there, I took catechism there, and I was confirmed there. And I literally loved the old Lutheran liturgy. I don't know how anybody knows it or not, but it was so reverent. It was 4-part harmony, and we'd sing that as kids, and the different parts. And then they come along sometime later on and decide that they had to jazz it up, and they enveloped a liturgy that you had to be Steve Allen to sing, you know. And that really had a hard effect on me. I thought, golly, Moses, why take something that's beautiful and as straightforward as they had and goof it up? But they sure did. So I thought about that for a long while. First summer job I had was a little summer job at Eccles Lake in Delaware. It was a beautiful spring-fed lake, and Mr. and Mrs. Eccles were really fine people. I was 11 years old when I went to work there, and I worked 4 hours a day for 25 cents an hour. And I took the baskets. You know, when you come there, you had to change clothes into your swimming suit. So you'd put your clothes in a basket, and I'd take that back and put it on the shelf, and then issue that to you when you got out. Made a great job for me, a learning experience that I'll never forget. Those people taught by example on how to treat people, how to you know, treat the public, and how to work. You know, what you need to do to learn while you're there working. You know, you weren't just standing around. There was always something to do. So that started setting my work ethic pretty early. The second job I had as a young man was at a little red and white grocery store. And I know we've all seen the red and white grocery stores, Parker's Grocery. Hired in there when I was 14 years old, and they'd asked my dad and mom if I wanted a job, if I'd work there, and I said, sure, I'd go up there and work. You know, it's a good opportunity to make the money, and you know, as a young man, you need the money to live on, because your mom and dad didn't have a whole lot to give you, you know, at that point in time. So I got my little apron on, my little white apron, my little pad with the carbon copy to write things on, and total them all up and add them all up. And I see a couple guys kind of smiling. They've probably been there, you know. But Dutch Reinhardt, the guy that owned the place, was just above reproach in his work ethic. I mean, when he was there, the store was open. Our hours were from 8 to 6, but it wasn't wait till 8 o'clock. If he was there at 7, he'd take anybody that walked through the door, you know. And that's just that just set me for life, you know. And also conflict resolution and how to treat people and stuff like that. But just, you had to really have it all when you're dealing with the public there. And we dealt with them. And of course, you know, you give me your order, and I'd chase the groceries and then carry them out for you. I'd add the bill up and charge you, and it was a good experience for me as a kid. And to this day, if I go to the store and it's 5 minutes to 9, I see people in there, it tears me up. I got to wait till 9 o'clock. Get that store open up, you know, get those people working. But I had to laugh. They talk about hours. There's 14. My summer hours were from 8 to 6, 8 in the morning to 6 at night, and then 8 to 9 on Saturdays. And those are 60 hours a week. But we were glad to have it, and I was learning some at the same time, getting paid, and having a lot of fun doing it. So throughout my career, I remained a Lutheran. Attendance got probably pretty spotty, and when I started at the Apollo program, at the Space Center, a lot of 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, and so that always affected attendance. I think the thing that really kept me going mostly was trying to sing in the choir. I loved to sing, and loved to sing in the choir down there if I could, and that was probably the biggest draw more than anything else at that point in time. But then I got to traveling after the Space Center in the late 70s and early 80s. I started traveling with nuclear power, and I did a lot of vendor qualifications. And I'd literally be out on the road, and I'd be one of those guys you hear them talk about on TBN all the time. If you're waking up at 2 o'clock in the morning, and your channel selecting, it'll stop here. I'd literally be there sometimes, maybe once a week anyhow. And if I could get a TBN program, I like to watch the testimonies. And you hear these people that just had everything. I mean, they were popular, they had money, fame, and no happiness. And those things excited me, how they found Christ, and that was a different concept to me than the Lutheran Church. The Lutheran Church doesn't, they pray to God in heaven. There's no thought about Him being, I don't think, in the church. And I'm not knocking the Lutherans. I love them, God love them, but it's just a different concept, really, in the way you approach your religious worship. So I watched those testimonies. I even saw Jim Lovell one night on there. Now Lovell had more time and space than any other astronaut, and he was giving his testimony. Now, here I am. I had all this fame and fortune, and my wife and I can't work it out until they found Christ. And then they worked it out and started giving their testimony around the world, and that kind of excited me and it gave me something to think about. What's going on here? I'd go back to church at that point in time, and I just wouldn't find any happiness in it. Then in 1997, I was in Anchorage, Alaska. I was working on a job up with a pipeline, and Rosa Parks was going to give her testimony at a church in Anchorage, and I said, well, I've got to see that. That's something I was interested in. So I went down there that Sunday morning, and she gave her testimony, and then they had an altar call, and I went down and gave my life to Christ at that service at that point in time. And I was really excited about it, but when I walked out the front door, I was still a Lutheran. I was back to the Lutheran church, and so I didn't get nurtured and no way to develop that process and go on with it. So I kind of just stayed that way until I finally, and I moved to Cleveland in '85 back in the old days with nuclear power, so and stayed here. And so when I retired finally, then I started working with Jim Rush Funeral Home, and it was a job that interested me because you could help people and learn something. And I would go to all the different services around the country with him, or around town with him, and I got to see a lot of them, and how they conducted themselves and how they worshiped. And of course, he was a Westmore member, so I liked Westmore, and that's really how I came to be here. I've been here about 3 or 4 years now, I guess, and still part of that. 2011, 12, and 13, I was working at nuclear power over at Browns Ferry, so I was in and out. You'd see me one Sunday, maybe not the next. So it was. That's just the way it was. I'm glad to be kind of a little bit closer now, and I think I've hung up the work area there. I started putting this package together, doing some tree reviews, for my family tree. I started this about 2003, and that's when I really started putting all this stuff together and realizing how blessed I was to have the career I've had, to have the life I've had growing up. And I know that I've prayed a lot, and God's answered my prayers, but I don't think I've ever experienced that personal relationship where people talk about, I talked to him today, he talked back. Well, I talked to him, but I don't always hear him. And I talked a little bit about that with Jason. He said sometimes it's not something that you hear directly, but you'll get it through the word or whatever. So that's something I'm still trying to. I've had a pretty strong ego all my life, and you know, all these career things I did, I thought I was really doing that until I put this package together, and now I can look back and see where God had his influence on my life. So that's how I came to Westmore. If you'll bear with me, we'll go ahead and talk about the Apollo program. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about it, so pay attention. We're going to have a test when this is all over. I'm just going to point out a couple things. I talked to somebody here that just toured the Space Center, but Apollo for me was these 6 areas. I had the Manned Space Operations Building, and that was where all of our stuff initiated. We brought the command module in as a single unit and ran the tests on it, and then we brought the service module in, put it in the altitude chamber where we pump it down to for altitude, run the tests on that, and then the service lunar adapter, which was just a protective device for the lunar lander. We brought that in, and we had a stand for that and tested that out, and when it was time, hooked the pyros to it and all that type of stuff. But once we got in here, we do the integrated testing in the altitude chamber. We'd stack the command module on top of the service module for those tests. We can pump it down to about 100,000 feet. So check the integrity of the vehicle. The astronauts would be in there in their suits with pure oxygen at a low pressure rating, and we check the integrity of the vehicle that way. Once we got everything done here, then we took it either to pad 34 or pad 37 if it was going to be an orbital shot. And I don't know, can you guys see this okay over there? I forgot about you back here behind me. If it was going to be a lunar shot, then we'd take it out to the VAB. We'd have the launch tower in the VAB, and we'd stack everything on top of the boosters there, and then the crawler would come under, pick it up, take it out either to pad 39A or 39B. I worked all the launches. Mine were all pretty much off 39A. So that's the layout as I go through this and talk about it that you're going to be familiar with there. Let's see, I got out of the Navy in 1959, February, and I hired in with a company called Westinghouse building refrigerators. I got a night shift job there, and it was great for me because I was going to start school in June for my electronics degree and had that already programmed. So I was kind of buying a little time there early before June, so give me a chance to kind of relax after I got out of service and enjoy life a little bit. But one March day, it was pretty snowy, my mother asked me to go up and pay the electric bill, and I said, sure, I'll do that. You know, I know the little old ladies, being from town, I knew the little old ladies that run the company up there, and in fact, one of them taught me in Sunday school for a while, so I said I'd do that. So lo and behold, I walked in there, and not only did they have the little old ladies, but they had another young lady in there, and a beautiful young girl, and I knew her, but couldn't think of her name. You know, and she'd moved to town just before I graduated. So what do you got a yearbook for, right? Yeah, I went home, dug that yearbook out. Oh yeah, that's who it is. So then I made arrangements to call her up, talk with her, and I started dating her, and that worked out pretty good until 1961. She graduated as an LPN in August, and I graduated my associate's degree in August, and we got married. And I'll tell you what, that's the best decision I ever made. Jean's Catholic, but she's as solid as in her prayer life and her worship life as can be, and she's literally the rock we built our family on. And that's working out now. We're working on 53 years, so it's been a while. So I love her today just like I did back then, probably more, a lot more. Then we went into family planning, which was always, you need to really do that, you know. So we had 5 children in the next 6 years. And you can't really do that without planning. I started out in aerospace working for North American Aviation on an A-3J Vigilante bomber in Columbus. And after I got married, I hired in with them and transferred later on. Then I transferred in 1966 after that program went by the wayside. The Apollo program was just starting to build up. They'd had one launch. And so they asked me if I wanted to move. I said, sure thing. You know, I'm ready. It's a job. You need a job. So I was ready to do that. And I got down there in March of 1966 and started out. They just had the qualifying launch off pad 34, and for those vehicle qualifications and for the launch tower, you know, the boosters and all that, they used what we called unmanned vehicles, and they had the mechanical buoy, we call it, which was a metal bench went across the command module, had 3 computers on it, and that was your astronauts. And so we'd test those out and make sure that they were getting right signals out of different, you know, parts of the computers and so forth, and then we'd launch it, and the computers would run the orbital programs, and that would qualify the vehicle. So they just qualified 34, and I picked up a vehicle that was on pad 37, and started working that, and we launched that in July of 1966, so it was a pretty quick turnaround on that vehicle. One of the things that happened there, and that was my first event down there that really kind of brought recognition to me, was Gene and I bought a house in Titusville, Florida, and we insured it with Allstate Insurance. And so lo and behold, about a month later, they called up, and I'm sure that this probably went about, all right, we're coming up on 8 million policy holders, and oh, hey, here's a guy at the Space Center, there's 8 million. So I was their 8 millionth policy holder, so they made a big deal out of that naturally, and wanted to tour the Space Center, and they had all our top management in, so I got to meet all our top management right off the bat, and they liked that kind of publicity, you know, it was good for them. So they put an article out in their magazine, and that's going to be important later on because it'll crop up again on this story as I go along. But meanwhile, in August of that year, then I picked up Apollo 1, which was going to be the Grissom, White, and Chaffee vehicle. And we started testing that in the MSOB and put it on the service module. We ran all the tests on it. We ran the flight readiness test with that vehicle, and everything ran perfect on it. So we stacked everything on a trailer. We stacked the service module on top of the SLAW, command module on top of the service module, and then we bring the LES, which is the low-level abort system. You know, it was a big rocket, and 150,000 pound of thrust, put that on there, and then we take that all to the pad. If it was going to be an orbital launch, we go to the pad 34, put it on the boosters out there. Those boosters out there were 2.5 million pounds of thrust on the first stage. If it was going to be a lunar launch, then we take it to the VAB and stack it on the launch tower out there, and the boosters out there. And of course, those boosters knew the difference in payload. That was 7.5 million pounds of thrust. So quite a bit of difference. One rocket was 225 feet, and the next rocket, you know, the lunar lander was 360. So it's pretty good size. So anyhow, we got down into, I'd already talked about the first event, but we got down into the launch pad out there then, and on January 25th of 1967 then, that winter we were ready for the flight readiness test, and when I went to work, oh no, I'll tell you, let me take that back. Before I went to work, I got a call from our general manager's office, Wally Ford, and said, the secretary said, Dick, Wally wants to talk with you. Could you come in early? And I said, yeah, I was working second trick that time. So I went out there a little early, I got in there about 2:30, and she said, go on in, they're waiting on you. I thought, oh boy, they're waiting on me, you know. I said, you know, here I am back in the general manager's office, what's going on? So I walked inside, and he said, Dick, I want you to meet Stu Harris from the State Department. Stu Harris from the State Department, now I'm really into it, and, you know, what's going on here? So he explained to me, he laughed, and said, no problems. He said, what we want to do, he said, we saw your article in AIM, that Allstate article in the AIM magazine. He said, and we put out And I bet you probably not anybody in here that knows this. We put out a magazine that goes to Russia. It's called America, and we put that out every month, and it takes a different part of the country, different jobs, whatever, it could be anything. And it's all in relation, and we just tell them about this country and how we operate and how we work and how we do. And he said, we'd like to tell them about how open aboard our space program is, and we'd like to use your family in it. And if it'd be okay. And I said, well, yeah, that'd be great, you know, I go along with that. So I left there that afternoon, then went on out to the launch pad, and we had the crew inside, full of uniforms, spacesuits, and we had 100% pure oxygen atmosphere on the vehicle, and trying to get them into a flight readiness test. And that's where we go ahead and pull the umbilical at lift off at T0, and we had the fuel cells running with oxygen and hydrogen in the vehicle, and then we go on internal power. Well, I got out there and they were in a hold at T-minus 10 minutes. And we tried to run that test on Wednesday, the 2 days before, and they got down on Wednesday, 2 days before, got same place, and they had a hold because of comm. It was staticky. They couldn't hear what was going on. Control room couldn't hear the guys in the vehicle very clear, and they couldn't figure it out. Well, Wednesday they jumped out of the vehicle and went on down. They'd been in there all day, got tired, and they said, when you got the comm figured out, come back and get us. So another guy, my job was to work in the spacecraft. I did the testing for the crew if they didn't want to do it, and any of the work that had to go on in the command module, that's what I did. So another guy and I jumped in when they jumped out and tried to see if we had it powered up, and they wanted to see what the control room was going to do. And all of a sudden that comm cleared up, and I don't think the crew had even got to the base of the stack yet. So we started running then that flight readiness test, and the other guy and I ran on down through liftoff and started into the orbital phase of the flight readiness test, and we turned that over to the third shift when they come in, and it worked beautiful. So there we are on Friday trying to do the same thing again, got the crew inside. My job is to pull the umbilical when it hits 0, and that's just a hog labor job. You just get 3 or 4 guys and just literally pull it off the vehicle when it hits T0. And but I sat down there for about an hour waiting, and I got tired. I went upstairs, and I thought, well, I'll see what's going on, and I can always get back down if they pick up the count. So I was sitting right by the vehicle talking to, I'm going to pass some of the stuff around here too, I don't want to forget that. Let me get this out real quick. I was talking to a QC, he was on the net, and he looked at me after I'd been there for about a half an hour. He said, Dick, they got a fire inside. And so I took about 2 steps and got about to this point right here, and then the flames ruptured at the hold down points where it mounted on the service module. It had 3 hold down points. So you can see where the flames kind of went up and kind of cooked a little bit of that vehicle at that point in time. So all of us up there, there was about 10 of us out there at that point in time. We went back out on a swing arm, and they had the doors so that they would automatically lock because they didn't want stray guys just come in and hanging around the level. So we couldn't get back in, and that's the flames up around that LES, and that's 150,000 pounds. But boy, if that thing goes off, we're all cooked, And but I got out there and we couldn't get back in, so we went on down the service structure and tried to get to the bottom, and then I went over to the launch tower. There you got 2 things. You got the service structure that folds around and then the launch tower. So I went up to the launch tower and just kind of waited around. At that point in time, we had an egress crew up there trying to get them out. They were dead. They died in probably about 11 or 12 seconds. And at that point in time, we had like a Block 1 vehicle, and there was 3 hatches that went on that. You had the inner hatch, you had the outer hatch, and then you had the boost protective hatch. So there was no way to get them out quickly. It was not, the Block 2 design had a 1 push, bam, and a lever, and then the hatch would fly open. It was a little bit different structure, but the weight on it was 700 pounds. and they didn't want to put that 700 pounds on that booster. You know, weight's critical when you look at your payload and all that. So yeah, we'll go with the old design and get the new design on the lunar module. So we were hanging around outside, and the president of the company called and said, hey, I want Dick and somebody else to go inside. And he said, when you get them out, and I watched him bringing the crew out, and said, I want him to go inside and look and see if we can figure out what happened out there. And so after they got, the Grissom was the last one they took out, took him down while Dick was shining. I went in first and spent a couple hours in there with trying to figure out what happened. I could see where the fire started, and they went across the main display console, and we had aluminum switch guards, you know, to keep them from inadvertently throwing two switches at one time. And you just see where it cut that aluminum just in two, so it's probably around 2,500 degrees at that point in time in there. So I'm going to pass around a couple pictures. Here's a picture of what I jumped into that night. That's looking in the hatch and the way that cooked that in the hatch. So I'll pass these around. You can be looking at them while we're. You know, another thing I'm going to start here too is I've got a piece. This is not Apollo, but this is a piece of what keeps the shuttle from burning up when it re-enters. And there's about 30,000 of these tile on there. And I happened to pick this up back in the late 70s when I was down there on a trip, and the guy stuck that in my car. So it's a piece of textile. It's not the actual. I'll let you take a look at that. And this is a picture of me in Apollo 14, but it just shows you, you know, this is in the roomiest vehicle going. You know, you're about 800 cubic feet inside there, so I fill up the hatch of that thing. I thought I'd just let you take a look at that and have some idea what it's like. I'm gonna get a little drink of water here. I spent that night there, give my deposition and so forth, so it was a long day. I went to work at 2:30 that afternoon, and they got out of there about 8:30 or 9 the next morning. It was a traumatic experience for me. I've suffered things from it. I had my hands break out, nervous system break out, you know. It took a year probably of putting creams on it and stuff to kind of get it back to normal again. And every once in a while I still have breakouts around, you know, just I think as a result of that. That put me into the fourth event down there, which is I got to work with the investigation board trying to figure out what had happened. We went out and tore that vehicle down, and that was a touchy situation because we didn't have any idea we had all the pyrotechnics on it at that point in time. Now we're starting to pull it back apart. Are they safe or not safe or what? We weren't really sure. So, you know, you twisted, everything was, you know, you were taking off. It was one turn at a time almost to get everything loose to tear it apart. And we took the LES off of it and shipped it out. Took the command module off and sent it down into a building where they could investigate it. Took the service module apart, and I worked with the crew. I would literally reach in for them, and whatever they had to pull out of that vehicle while we pull it out until we could get the couches out, and then they built a work platform in there. But it was a busy time at the Space Center at that point in time. We had qualifying vehicles that were trying to get ready for pad 39A and 39B. And I was going to pick up the one on 39A. I was working at that point in time with the investigation board, so that was a lot of work and a lot of long hours on that. So we got that done, and I picked up 39A. And that was Apollo 4, and that was going to be a block qualifying vehicle for the booster, so there was no astronauts. It had three mechanical astronauts in there, the computers. So. But while we're trying to get that thing stacked, we had it out at the VAB, and they couldn't get it set down on the booster. Couldn't get it lined up right. So they we had at that point in time, we had our inertial measurement unit and did all the navigation for the navigation system, floated in a medium that would have, once it was heated, it had to stay heated. You could never cool it down because you couldn't guarantee the accuracy of it again for some reason. So we always had that heated from the time it was made in California, whatever, it stayed heated. So we had a battery pack on that thing while they were trying to get it, stacked on top of the boosters. And my boss came over to me, and we're up there, trying to get it set down. We're at the 360-foot level. You walk over the edge, you look down, that's all opened up, and it's a long drop, so you had to be careful. So my boss said, Dick, we got to get that thing disconnected and get the ground power hooked up to it. And I said, okay, what do we got to do? He said, well, they're going to swing that vehicle, and that's a 70-foot rocket, the top part of that rocket. They're going to swing that in as close to the work platform as they can do it. They can do it in micro inches, They're going to swing that in. And then I was figuring some high-tech fix, He said, then we're going to take this safety belt, if you'll go along with this, and we're going to just put this safety belt under your armpits. We got two guys going to hold these lanyards. Guys going to hold your feet, and we want you to lean out. I said, whoa, that sounds good. So there I am. I didn't look down because it's a long way down. I leaned out, probably about a 40 degree, and I unhooked that connector, and they handed me the ground connector, and I hooked that back up, and away we go. You just never knew what you were going to get into. So that was the fifth event, and you got to understand that everything we did was on television, closed circuit television. It was piped to Washington, it was piped to Houston, it was piped to places around the world, Huntsville. So they're looking at all this. I mean, everything we did was if you got heated with somebody and had a heated argument, you had to get them out of the line of the cameras. Otherwise, it'd look bad for you. So that's the way it was. So that was that high-tech fix. Then I got involved with another event not long after that they were trying to get the Skylab ready to go. And some technician, that's just a vertical laboratory in there at that point in time. It's on a booster. One of their techs dropped a meter. And it hit several circuit breakers on the panels and broke the circuit breakers off. All that was sticking out was just a little metal nub on there on those breakers. Well, they didn't have a method to repair those, and we did. So they asked me if I would go over and go on the Skylab and repair those breakers. There were 3 or 4 of them that would have been costly and at the point in time delay their launch. So I said, yeah, I'd do that. Now, I'd never done this job other than the certification process. We'd never broken any breakers. But anyhow, I went ahead and got all my equipment, went over there, and I set up the molds on those circuit breakers and mixed up the stuff, put it in a hypodermic needle and shot it in the molds, and golly whiz, they worked out beautiful and saved them a lot of money. But why do these things keep coming to me to repair? I don't know, but I just never had any fear about doing that stuff. I just whether that was a good Lord knew I had to do that or what, I don't know, but I just never bothered me. I said, okay, I'll do it. So that was the only time I was on the Skylab, and it was a lot of fun. I got to see that laboratory, and it was interesting to do that. The 7th event for me was we were doing the flight readiness test for Apollo 11, and that was Neil Armstrong and Aldrin and crew, and we were in the altitude chamber. I'd come back from lunch one day, and we were running the flight readiness test, and they said, don't go in. He said, the crew was made to come down and run this next portion of the test. It had about an hour's, we were in orbit at that point in time with it, and he said, we'll just wait a few minutes and see. So I stand outside the vehicle there, and all of a sudden there come Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, and they said, okay, go ahead and get in, Dick. So I went in and got in the right-hand seat, and Aldrin, of course, he was in the center seat, and Armstrong was the commander. He was in the left-hand seat, and I ran that test with the big dogs, and that didn't mean much to them, but it sure did. It sure did to me. And Aldrin and I ran the test, and Armstrong just laid over there with his eyes closed. I know he's probably listening, but that's just the way he was. Armstrong was a pretty low-key individual, so that's a unique experience. I can guarantee that there's no other launch people have been in a vehicle with Armstrong and Aldrin. I had a chance to see Aldrin down here in Chattanooga. Dick Scovey's wife, who was on the Challenger, works at UTC, and she had him in to speak to the Red Cross and dinner one day, and I bought a $50 ticket to go down here. So afterwards I walked over and introduced myself to Buzz, and I said I was on your launch team. I think he must have thought I said lunch team. Because it didn't mean much to him. He didn't, oh, we're in, not, hey, great, how you doing, and all that. So I know that meant more to me than it did to him. The next event happened with one, I think it was Apollo 12. I'm not sure just which vehicle it was, but we were down on the launch count to about T-minus 10 hours. And launch counts when we first went to the Space Center were just tremendous pressure. We'd set up for maybe a 40-hour count. Well, if you had a problem, then you didn't have enough time to fix it. And if you had to call a hold, and you're in the in the launch count, then all that money from every other company went on your budget. You paid for that. So you waited to the last second before you call a hold. You were waiting on the booster to call a hold or somebody else, and so they were touchy situations. Well, we finally learned to put about 2 weeks in that launch, so we had a lot of built-in time in case we did have a problem. But here we were down about 10 hours on the launch count. We were fully loaded, had all our fuel on our vehicles, on board. The fuel cells were running, liquid hydrogen and oxygen, involved with it. And of course, this is the one that blew up in Apollo 13. When they were stirring the tanks, they blew that whole bay out. So they come in. I went to work. It was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and my boss said, "Dick, we got a problem." He said, "We're not getting power. We need a couple signals in the fuel cell bay, and we want to go in and I can't ask you to do this because there's danger to it." But he said, "We need to go in and get this stuff taken care of. Pull a wire out of the connectors and re-terminate and reinsert the new wires, and we think we can get the signals we want." So I said, "Well, let's go." So they pulled the big panel off of it, and then when that heat hit me from that fuel cell operation, probably about 120 degrees, I started thinking, well, did I do the right thing here or not? I mean, that thing, your fuel cells are right there, your oxygen and hydrogen tanks are right there, and if you make a slip or something goes wrong, it's just Katie bar the door. So anyhow, I got in there, and I didn't actually get into it. I had a pad that I could lay on. I was leaning about half in, half out of it, and I located the connector I needed, got the wires cut, the new wires in, and got it all back together again, and they got their signals they wanted, so we closed that up. But that was probably an exciting couple hours for me, and there again, like I said, you're on cameras around the world, everybody's watching you, so you just hope everything goes right. But you know what, there again, I just had confidence level that I was going to do the job, and there was not going to be any problems. And I think if it was any other way, you'd probably had problems. You had to have confidence in your abilities. We're coming down into the next vehicle, and I got into Apollo 13, and that's the one that we had all the trouble with in space, and we'd loaded oxygen in the tank and the hydrogen, and verified the fuel cell operation while we were detanking everything, and we couldn't get the oxygen tank to vent like it should. So it was taking a long time to get that oxygen out of there. And that's a pad clear situation when you're working with those fuels or those cryogenics. So I was in the vehicle by myself, and then there was 2 guys down on the service module level to do all the hookup and disconnects, and I was stirring the tanks. If they needed one to stir the tanks, and I'd hit the switch and do that, and that'd keep that oxygen from strategizing or stratifying in there, and keep it mixed and keep it liquid. So you know, every time they wanted to serve, we did. And they decided to go ahead and increase the voltage up on that to get those heaters to operate a little bit more effectively. And Beach Aircraft, who made those tanks, said, oh yeah, we beefed up the insulation on those things, and they're the new design, go ahead and do that. Well, they fibbed. They didn't know what the configuration was that we had, and they hadn't beefed up the insulation, so when they increased the voltage on it, why the insulation melted on those heater wires. And if I'm in there switching it right then and those things short out, then I'm gone. But waited until the crew got into space, and it hit it during one of the course corrections when they operated one of the engines, and it shorted that wiring. What it did, it just blew that whole oxygen panel and fuel cell panel out of that vehicle. So when that happened, they called us. It was about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning when I got the call, and we all had to go in the Space Center. Of course, we got to try to get those guys back at that point in time. They got, you know, just a limited supply of oxygen. On the command module, they had a 1-hour bottle. Once they came back in and hit separation, got rid of their service module and stuff, they had an hour to get in and get down. And they're coming at 25,000 miles an hour, and if they hit too thin, they go off into space. If they hit too thick, they burn up coming in on re-entry. So that was their supply at that point in time, other than the LEM. And of course, the engineering team down in Houston got them in the LEM right now. And we took everything we had in the command module that we knew the crew had, and we duplicated that down at the vehicle. We put a service module in the altitude chamber. We put a command module on top of that. We brought a LEM into the MSOB, turned it upside down to set that down on top of the command module, and took the tunnel hatch out. And then we had all their stuff, everything they had in that command module, we had. So if they wanted to, if Houston would call us and say, hey, we need to see if we can run this wire over here, or this wire over there, or something over here, we would do it and verify that it would work, and then we'd tell them, and then they'd run a procedure on that and send that up to the crew. And that's how we, you know, the canister, the CO2 canister was one of the big deals in there, because their CO2 buildup was going to kill them. And we had a square canister in the command module and a round canister in the LEM, and we were loading up that LEM, so we had to figure out somehow getting the square canister hooked up to the round canister, or the round mating point there. And a couple of our mechanics took the stuff they had in there, the tape and plastics and stuff like that, and did that. And that, of course, that saved them. They got just in time, and that kept them, you know, cleaned until they got back into the Earth's atmosphere. So those were exciting times. The movie, if you're asking about the movie is right on, except they didn't mention us at the Cape. You know, everything was done in Houston. So, and I can appreciate that, because it would have been confusing to be bouncing back and forth on that anyhow. But those were exciting times down there at that point in time. One of the things that did happen were their experiments that Jack Schweigert, who took Mattingly's place, you know, and he was thrilled he got to fly. Mattingly was mad, but it turned out bad for both of them, or right for Mattingly and bad for Schweigert. But Schweigert fired that S-4B engine. The S-4B give you your Earth orbit apogee, and it fired for a few minutes on the liftoff phase to push you into orbit, and then it fired again to get you translunar injection. And that's coming around the Earth, you know, it fires here and gets you broke out where you can get toward the moon. You know, it takes 25,000 miles an hour to break that gravity, the gravitational pull. So we got the S-4B trailing along up there, and Schweigert fired a course correction for it, and the thing hit the moon, and they had seismic monitors that they had put up there on one of the lunar landers, and it recorded movement for 4 hours. I thought that was pretty phenomenal. You know, it just kept recording movement. So that was one of the experiments that they got. I'm going to pass another thing around here. I kind of forgot about here, but it's coming up. I'm going to talk about it. And that's it's a medal that Al Worden flew around the moon for me on Apollo 13 or 15. I thought you guys might be interested in that. And if you are, you can read the letter and pass that around. I was working Al's launch, and Al and I had worked together for 3 or 4 different flights over the year before he flew, and I was working second trick when on his vehicle. Carl Henniges was an astronaut that was a backup that came out, and he stuck his head in the hatch. He said, "Here's Hagar," and I said, "That's me." He said, "Well, Al must think a lot of you. He wants to fly something for you." And I had that little St. Christopher medal on the sun visor of my car. So I got out of the vehicle, went down and got that St. Christopher medal and gave it to Henniges, and then I flew that on Apollo 15. They were allowed to fly so much personal stuff, you know. And they gave me a nice letter with it, so that's what I call my career attaboy. And the other thing, the last thing that happened to me out there, and then I'll open it for questions if you want to ask questions, but Werner von Braun came out every vehicle. Nobody ever saw Werner, though. Nobody ever saw Werner. And I was working on Apollo 17, and I was working third shift at that point in time. I went out about 1 o'clock in the morning to go up to the vehicle, and lo and behold, I jumped on the elevator, there's Werner von Braun. And I couldn't believe it, so I just shook hands with him, and where he went, I don't know. He got off there at one of the stops, probably went to the vehicle, or boosters, but he would come out every vehicle and walk around and look at it, you know. But you know, you'd say, "Anybody see Werner this trip?" No, I didn't see him. You know, when he's coming, you just never knew when he was going to come. And he was a low-key individual, also. You know, you didn't know when he was. You wouldn't know him from the man in the moon if you didn't recognize him. And he didn't draw any attention to himself. So I did get to meet Werner von Braun, and that kind of. That series of events, I think, were kind of unique. I got involved with things that none of the other individuals, you know, that worked with us got involved with, and some of them could have been life-threatening. Some of them were just fun to be around and do. So that was my Apollo career. So if you want, you got any questions? Has anybody been to the Space Center? I know we've got one. You have been. So it's quite a tour down there, isn't it? Yeah.
Who was Werner von Braun? What was this?
He was the designer for the Apollo.
Okay.
And Werner was really a booster man. In fact, I was telling somebody today that you know, we had to do things. You know, you got the schedule says we're going to do things. What do you mean that engine's not ready to go? It's got to go. You know, and we were having cavitation problems with some of the 1.5 million thrust engines on Apollo. And they got down to where we had to fly it, and it would still fly okay, but it was upsetting to have those problems. But so they said, "Let's go. We're going to go with those engines, whether they are perfect or not." Well, they never had a cavitation problem with any of the flight vehicles. The good Lord must have straightened it out for them. So because we went ahead and started launching them and never had a problem with that cavitation. So.
Werner von Braun, did we get him at the end of World War II?
Yeah.
And he was one we got instead of Russia? Is that?
That's right. We brought about 30 of them at the end of World War II. I'm not sure how many of them came over, but we had all those guys. Our whole staff came out of Germany.
A lot of the younger guys would not know this, but he was with the Nazis in World War II. He's a German.
Yeah.
Who worked with their missile programs or rockets or whatever.
Who was that? Oh, Werner? Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, right. Yeah.
But it's funny, people my age are surprised that younger people don't know who he was.
Oh, well, you know what? That's one of the reasons why I was thinking about this group this morning. I thought, you know, a lot of these guys will all be able to relate to stuff I'm telling them.
Yeah, I'm no spring chicken.
I'm not either. So, but that was it was a good career. I actually spent 40 years in nuclear power, and really it was probably one of my better jobs was investigating employee concerns for the nuclear program, the nuclear power program, and there I would pray to God, literally, I'm doing a lot of intimidation and type investigations or sexual harassment investigations and stuff like that, and you got to get those things right. If you got somebody that's trying to, maybe almost a whistleblower, you're trying to keep him from going outside, the company or whatever. And I was always at a troubled plant. I was never at a plant that was running smooth. they were in trouble. So I'd literally pray before I do an investigation that, you know, I could look at the evidence and make the right determinations that, for these individuals. And that was a good job. I worked with everybody from CEOs down in that business, and it was a good career for me.
How safe is nuclear power in your judgment? What's your opinion?
Well, it's safe, but you've got to, you know, it's the old thing, you either do it now or you pay me later, you know, pay me now or pay me later. And we've always gotten in trouble like Millstone. Millstone was changing their core around and making fast outages, but they weren't issuing DCNs, so that they lost track of where the bundles were in the core. I mean, it was burning fine, but where's bundle 478? I don't know. It's, you know, it could be anywhere in there. So that's, you know, you get in trouble. It takes time to initiate DCNs and do a lot of stuff, but you've got to do it. You know, Davis-Besse wasn't cleaning their reactor building. Their reactor building was so crapped up, and then they, the boron just ate through their reactor vessel. So,
what about the sharing between nations? The knowledge and the progress you're making, or how much of that is
with
like
space?
Russia? Yeah.
Well, you know what, the sharing between nations is better than it has been with the shuttle and the space station and things like that, because we put so many different people up there. And the only thing that I hate to see about it was the fact that we let Russia be the carrying back and forth vehicle. And it's hurting us right now, you know, with trying to bear down on them and make them comply with different things. So I just always wanted us to be in control of our own destiny on that. You know, and it gets down to we're not the leader, they are. And by the way, we do go with a two-gas system now, you know, with the nitrogen and oxygen mixture, so we don't have that fire hazard on the launch pad. How many of them are familiar with the space race? You know, there's only one people that did that, and that's the Americans. That's because there never was a space race. When I was doing the investigation after the fire, I was talking to Don Isley one day, and he flew with Wally Schirra off of pad 34, and I didn't really talk about that vehicle because we didn't have any problems with it. But I asked Don, I said, well, what's this? You know, how's this fire going to affect the space race? He said, there's no space race. He said, they've never had a system that you can go deep space. You know, it's a two-gas system. They can't contain it. And, you know, it's a different weight vehicle and all that. The only way you can go deep space is with pure oxygen and low pressure. And so we knew right from the bat that we were going to beat the Russians. Now, they put an unmanned thing up there, which they did. They put a crawler or whatever, but I have no idea what they got out of that.
I heard a lot while I was down there recently about going to Mars.
Yeah.
Is that just because that's the nearest?
Well, that's probably the nearest thing that they can get to, that they think may be able to, you know, that they can live in the atmosphere, you know, once they get up there. Buzz Aldrin's very active in that right now. He has a company in California that he's trying to work that out, and I don't doubt they'll do it. You know, it's just getting a payload. And our next booster was going to be a nuclear booster for, you know, for deeper space payloads, but due to nuclear power and everything else, they quit all the research and development on that and never did qualify a nuclear booster. But those launches down there were exciting. You know, I went out on pad 39. It was 600 feet from the center of the pad on out to the fence that was around it. And after the first launch off there, I went out and drove around. There was a seagull that was hanging on that fence, and there wasn't a feather on it. Amazing times. It's a good program, you know, like I was telling Herb up there, you know, you might start a test when I first went down there, and a computer would shut you down somewhere, and it might be a week or two before you'd ever figure out what the problem was and get back into that test again. And in fact, it got so touchy, and so if I was running a test and it was going good, and the next shift come on, don't send Hagar home. I don't care what happens, don't send, now this guy can throw a switch the same way I can, but they just didn't want to change anything, you know? Keep that luck going. If we had something running good, just keep it going, and, but it's, they were exciting times. Like I said, we got a guy that was here, I don't see him here today, but his company made the liquid oxygen for us, and he worked at the Space Center down there at that point in time, and those tanks out there for the vehicle, for the first stages were 800,000 gallon tanks, so that's a lot of cryogenics, and you know, you had to think about just driving around the pad for security and stuff. You know, if you had, those tanks were always venting off, and if you had the right atmosphere out, that liquid gaseous oxygen could all drop at the ground level. And they lost 2 cruisers one day. Security did. One guy drove into it and started his cruiser fire, and the other guy went to pick him up, drove into that cloud that set his cruiser on fire. So they lost 2 cruisers. They got out of it all right, but you just had to think all the time. Had to think all the time.
Rick, on the guy, do you have any comments on the space shuttle that blew up on the? I know it probably brings back some bad memories and all, but
What about it
the
now?
space shuttle that blew up?
Yeah.
Do you have any comments on that? About the O2? You know, the oxygen rings that evidently caused the oxygen leak.
Well, there again, you know, that's they were out of the launch parameters. You know, when that temperature dropped down, those rings really kind of shrunk. You know, they lost their capability to perform, and they decided to go with it. Right, you know, and it killed 7 astronauts. Those are decisions you make. You know, again, you know, the pressures there again are monetary. You know, we got this vehicle sitting there. We've been trying to get this vehicle off the ground, and we, you know, that weather at that point in time had been keeping them on the ground. So those are the launch considerations that we were facing. You know, and Apollo was trying to get that. You know, you just didn't want any kind of a hold. If you thought it would go, you did it. And the vehicle, the shuttle, we use on the first stage and second stage of our vehicles, we use RP1, which is a kerosene blend fuel, and then we energize it with liquid oxygen on the first stage, and then liquid hydrogen on the second stage, you know, and they burned. But the fuels for the shuttle on those 2 big side tanks are mixed. All they have to do is mix. You don't have to heat them, they just mix them, and they almost explode. So they have to use the weight of that vehicle to keep it from clearing the launch tower too quick, you know, otherwise it'd probably knock the crew out. So they use those 3 engines in the back. Those are liquid engines. They use those, and as they're going on up, to give it the power to get into orbit. And that's what happened. Was he was taking his throttle to the next level, and that shot of, you know, I forget what it was, some type of spark out of there, and it caused that thing to blow. But those fuels, we literally watch the satellites. They use the same fuel combination. A 200-foot satellite rocket on coming off pad 40 would clear the launch tower in a second and a half. Boom, it's gone. And they were exciting because they get out of roll and configuration, they'd have to destroy them. They'd get up there a mile or 2 and have to blow them up. You never knew whether they were going to go or not with those satellites in the early days. And so, exciting times.
You ever go watch some night takeoffs or night launches?
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, I worked some of the night launches, but yeah, you can see them for a long way, you know.
They put the solid propellant thing out. Solid propellant rockets. What is a solid propellant?
You use and I'm not sure whether it's actually solid or not, but UDMH, unsymmetrical dimethyl hydrazine, is one of the blends, and then nitrogen tetroxide is the oxidizer for that. And they're just literally, when they start pressurizing them and throw them out to the bottom, when they mix, they just explode. And, whatever down there is going up, okay? So,
Kind of like a sliding board, like that, you think it's something solid. Two come together.
it's, they're solid in the fact that it's not a liquid per se. We use those in the service module, and they would gas off, you know, and literally, so you had to be careful you didn't have a leak in there, because, you know, if your fuel started leaking and mixing, you know, you're gonna explode right there on the pad.
Yeah, all those
So, they were exciting times, you know, when you loaded fuels, we were in SCAPE, which was a self-contained atmospheric pressure ensemble. You were in a big suit with liquid air on your back, and that was a fun time because it only had one demand. So you had to learn how to work in a SCAPE suit so that you didn't run out of air. You could suck it all out of the face mask, and then you're trying to catch up, you know, and it's that was a scary situation, and you couldn't get out of that escape suit. You had to have somebody in the early days get you out of it, you know. So they got the sizes big enough for guys like me, then I could take that helmet off and get down in it and breathe that air.
The surface of the limbs looks like tinfoil. Can you describe what the limbs made out of?
It's like aluminum foil. It's about 20 mils thick. And because it doesn't have, you know, doesn't have any pressure up in space. So all you had to do is protect it to get it out of this atmosphere. That's the reason why they put it in the lunar adapter.
In the vacuum of space, did it puff like a balloon? Or?
No, they'd have an inner wall that would, you know, that would hold the inner pressure. But you're talking only about 5 psi. You know, you're not talking about a whole lot of pressure inside. So there's no. You know, it was like a cocoon in a way. Then your aluminum foil just kind of held it on the outside of it. I don't know the total design of it, but I know it's. We had to be careful if you went into the lunar adapter and it was loaded. You had to be very careful that you didn't hit it or whatever.
How resilient was it to puncture?
It wouldn't puncture. Yeah, I mean, it'd be like a heavy duty aluminum foil. You could hit it, you know, it'd be all right, but you didn't want to. You wanted to be careful around it.